Dead men aren't supposed to leave fingerprints on the living. The wind rolled cold across Arlington, carrying the scent of rain, damp stone, and freshly folded flags through the crowded memorial courtyard. Gray clouds hung low over Virginia like bruises that never healed, muting the afternoon sky into shades of steel and ash. Rows of white chairs stretched across the lawn beneath black awnings while Navy officers, Marines, Gold Star families, and retired veterans stood in quiet clusters, their voices softened by memory and distance. Somewhere near the far end of the ceremony grounds, a lone trumpet practiced a trembling note before falling silent again. And in the middle of it all stood a little girl in a pale blue coat clutching the leash of a German shepherd who refused to blink. Lily Harper was only 8 years old, but grief had already taught her how to stay quiet in rooms full of adults. Her blonde hair stirred gently in the November wind as she stood beside her mother near the memorial wall where engraved names shimmered beneath droplets of rain. She barely moved. Neither did the dog. Rex stood tall beside her, sable fur dark against the wet pavement, amber eyes fixed across the courtyard with the kind of focus military dogs never truly lose. He wasn't restless. He wasn't nervous. He was listening, watching, remembering something no human there could see. The ceremony had begun 20 minutes earlier, but Rex had stopped reacting to the crowd the moment 5 men entered through the eastern gate. Navy SEALs, tall, broad-shouldered, moving with the quiet discipline of men who spent their lives carrying secrets too heavy for ordinary conversation. Their black dress uniforms were pressed sharp beneath long charcoal coats, dampened by drizzle. Silver tridents gleamed against their chests each time lightning flickered behind the clouds. Commander Cole Mercer walked at the front, his jaw tight beneath streaks of gray at his temples. Beside him came Ryan Holt, heavier now than in his service years, though his posture remained rigid out of habit. Daniel Pierce carried a folded umbrella under one arm, while Mason Reed and Travis Boone followed in silence behind them. 5 men, 5 veterans, 5 survivors of a mission no one publicly discussed anymore. The moment they appeared, Rex froze. Not stiff with aggression, still in a different way, like a compass needle finding north. His ears lifted slowly. His chest stopped rising for half a second. Then came the stare, focused entirely on Ryan Holt. Lily felt the leash tighten in her mittened hand. "Rex?" she whispered softly. The dog did not look at her. Rain ticked softly against the memorial banners overhead, while distant thunder rolled somewhere beyond the Potomac. Around them, people continued talking in hushed voices, unaware that something invisible had shifted in the air. Ryan Holt approached the memorial wall with the others, removing his gloves as he stopped beneath a bronze plaque etched with names of fallen operators. His expression stayed unreadable, but exhaustion clung to him like cold smoke. He looked older than the others. Not physically, spiritually, like a man who hadn't slept properly in years. Rex took one step forward, then another. Slow, controlled. His claws clicked softly against the wet stone path. Lily's mother leaned down quickly. "Honey, hold him back," she whispered nervously. But Lily barely heard her, because Rex had never walked towards strangers like this before, especially not with that look in his eyes. The dog stopped 10 feet from Ryan Holt and stared directly at his right arm beneath the dark sleeve of his coat. Ryan noticed him immediately. His shoulders tightened, just slightly, barely enough for anyone else to catch. But Rex caught it. The German shepherd's breathing changed. Slower now, deeper, the kind of breathing dogs use when scent unlocks old memory. Ryan glanced away first. "Beautiful dog," Daniel Pierce muttered quietly, trying to break the tension. No one answered him. The rain intensified overhead, tapping softly across umbrellas and polished marble while Rex remained perfectly still. Then Ryan reached absent-mindedly to adjust his sleeve. Just for a second, the cuff slid upward enough to reveal faded black ink near his wrist. A tattoo, the outline of a German shepherd's face, burned slightly along the edges by old scar. Tissue. Lily stopped breathing. Her small fingers loosened around the leash. "My father had that tattoo," she whispered. The words barely rose above the rain. But all 5 SEALs heard her, and every one of them froze. Completely. Daniel Pierce lowered his umbrella slowly. Mason Reed looked toward Ryan like someone had punched the air from his lungs. Travis Boone's face drained of color beneath the gray daylight. Commander Mercer closed his eyes for one painful second. And Ryan Holt. Ryan looked like he had just seen a ghost standing in the middle of Arlington Cemetery. Rex stepped closer. No bark. No growl. Just silence. Heavy silence. The kind soldiers recognize before terrible truths finally surface. Lily stared at the tattoo with wide blue eyes, her voice trembling now. My daddy used to draw that dog for me. Ryan's hand instinctively pulled the sleeve back down. Too fast. Too nervous. Rex immediately reacted. His ears flattened. A low sound rumbled deep in his chest. Not anger, not fear, but something older. Recognition. The wind swept harder across the memorial courtyard, carrying the smell of wet wool, coffee, and distant stormwater through the rows of white chairs. Somewhere behind them, the trumpet finally began to play. Soft, broken, morning notes drifting beneath dark clouds, while 5 hardened Navy SEALs stood motionless before a little girl and a dog who somehow knew too much. And for the first time in 8 years, Ryan Holt looked truly afraid. The trumpet notes drifted low across the memorial lawn like ghosts searching for a place to rest. No one moved for several seconds after Lily spoke. Rain gathered along the shoulders of dark military coats and slid quietly onto the stone beneath their feet, while Rex remained fixed on Ryan Holt with an intensity that made even strangers uncomfortable. The German shepherd's amber eyes did not blink once. Commander Cole Mercer finally cleared his throat softly, though the sound carried no authority anymore. Only fatigue. Lily, he said carefully, forcing warmth into his voice. That is a very old tattoo. A lot of servicemen had similar ones back then. But the little girl shook her head immediately. No, sir. She whispered. Not like that one. Her gaze stayed locked on Ryan's arm. My father drew the scar over the ear exactly the same way. Ryan's jaw tightened so hard the muscles near his temple flickered beneath the rain. He looked toward Commander Mercer as if silently asking for help, but the older man avoided his eyes. Around them, the ceremony continued in respectful quiet. Families placed flowers beside engraved names. Veterans embraced beneath umbrellas. A young sailor folded chairs near the rear walkway, while coffee steamed from silver containers beside the reception tent. Normal life moved forward only a few yards away, completely unaware that 5 men were standing inside the ruins of a secret they had buried for almost a decade. Rex suddenly stepped closer. His nose lifted slightly into the cold air. Ryan instinctively took half a step backward. That was when Lily noticed his hands trembling. Very slightly, but enough. Children always notice things adults try hardest to hide. You knew my daddy, she said softly. Not a question. Ryan swallowed hard. A long time ago. His voice sounded dry, scraped thin by years of silence. Lily's mother, Claire Harper, moved protectively beside her daughter, placing one hand on Lily's shoulder while studying the men in front of them with growing unease. Claire was 34, pale-skinned with tired blue eyes that had spent too many years carrying grief politely. She had loved Ethan Vale once with the fierce certainty only military wives understand. Then one day the Navy arrived at her door carrying condolences instead of answers. No body recovered. Mission classified. Sacrifice honored. End of story. At least officially. But Claire had stopped believing official stories the day she watched Rex refuse to leave Ethan's empty duffel bag 8 years earlier. Dogs did not mourn empty rooms like that unless something inside them still waited. Lily, Claire whispered gently, that is enough. But Rex disagreed. The German shepherd moved again, closer now, until only a few feet separated him from Ryan Holt. Rainwater darkened the thick fur along his back, while his breathing remained calm and measured. Not threatening. Watching. Remembering. Ryan stared down at the dog, and for the first time since arriving at Arlington, genuine fear crossed his face. Because Rex was not reacting like a stranger. He was reacting like family. Mason Reed stepped forward quietly beside Ryan. Maybe we should go inside, he muttered under his breath. Now. Travis Boone nodded once, his eyes scanning the crowd nervously. But before any of them could move, Rex let out a low whine unlike anything Lily had ever heard from him before. The sound was soft, broken, almost human. It froze all 5 men harder than shouting ever could. Daniel Pierce looked away immediately, rubbing rainwater from the back of his neck, while guilt settled visibly across his face. Commander Mercer exhaled slowly into the cold air. He remembers, Travis whispered hoarsely. Ryan closed his eyes. just for a second. And in that second, the years seemed to collapse inward around him. Because he remembered too. Northern Syria. 8 years earlier. Black sky. Burning sand. The smell of smoke rolling across shattered concrete, while radio static screamed through the dark. Ethan Vale laughing beside him hours before everything went wrong. If we make it home, Ethan had said quietly while cleaning dust from Rex's ears. I am buying Lily the biggest Christmas tree in Virginia. Ryan could still hear it. Still see the way Ethan smiled when he talked about his daughter. The memory hit him so hard his chest physically tightened beneath his coat. Rex took another step forward and pressed his nose lightly against Ryan's trembling hand. Silence swallowed the courtyard again. Then Ryan pulled away too quickly. Rex immediately stiffened. Commander Mercer noticed it. So did Claire. Why is he acting like that? Claire asked quietly. No one answered her. The rain began falling harder now, turning the memorial pathways slick beneath polished shoes while distant thunder rolled over the river. A flag snapped sharply in the wind somewhere above them. Lily looked between the men with growing confusion. Did my daddy save you? She asked Ryan softly. That question nearly destroyed him. Ryan's lips parted slightly, but no words came out. His eyes drifted toward the memorial wall where Ethan Vale's name was carved into cold white stone among dozens of others. Lieutenant Commander Ethan Vale. Beloved father. Decorated operator. Missing in action. Presumed dead. Ryan stared at the name like it had followed him into every room for 8 straight years. Because it had. Claire noticed the change in his expression immediately. You know something? She whispered. Ryan looked at her then. Really looked at her for the first time. The woman Ethan used to describe during long deployments. The woman whose photograph Ethan kept folded inside his vest pocket until the edges wore soft with time. Claire Harper had aged since Ryan last saw her. Grief did that to people. But the resemblance between her and Lily suddenly felt unbearable. Especially the eyes. Ethan's eyes. Rex shifted again beside the little girl and slowly sat down in front of Ryan Holt. Calm. Obedient. Waiting. It was the exact command Ethan had trained him to do before important decisions. Ryan's face lost all color. No, he whispered under his breath. No, not that. But the dog did not move. Rain dripped steadily from Rex's muzzle, while the old German shepherd stared upward with quiet expectation, as though he still believed Ryan was supposed to do the right thing. And somewhere deep beneath years of military discipline and buried shame, Ryan Holt realized the dog had never forgiven him. The rain eased into a cold mist that drifted across the memorial grounds like breath over glass, softening the edges of the white marble and turning every distant light into a pale blur. No one around them seemed to notice the silence tightening between the 5 Navy SEALs and the little girl standing beside the German shepherd. But silence inside military circles carried weight, sometimes more than shouting ever could. Ryan Holt slowly lowered his gaze toward Rex, and the moment their eyes met again, something inside him visibly cracked. The dog had aged since Syria. Gray now touched the fur around his muzzle, and faint stiffness lingered in the way he shifted his weight on damp pavement. But those eyes had not changed. Ethan used to joke that Rex could read a guilty conscience faster than any interrogator in the Navy. Back then they laughed about it. Nobody was laughing now. Ryan, Commander Mercer said quietly, his tone low enough that nearby families could not hear. We need to move this conversation somewhere private. Ryan nodded once, but Rex remained seated directly in front of him, unmoving. Waiting. Claire noticed the tension immediately. What happened over there? She asked softly. In Syria. Mason Reed rubbed a hand over his mouth while staring toward the memorial wall. Travis Boone shifted uneasily beneath the awning, rainwater dripping from the brim of his cap. Daniel Pierce looked physically sick. Only Commander Mercer still carried enough composure to speak clearly. Mrs. Harper, he said gently, there are some things about that operation that were classified. Claire's tired blue eyes hardened instantly. Classified is what people say when they do not want to tell military families the truth. That landed harder than she intended, especially on Ryan, because she was right. 8 years ago, Claire had sat inside a cold naval office while strangers handed her Ethan's folded flag and explained that operational details could not be disclosed for national security reasons. She remembered every inch of that room. The stale coffee smell, the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, the officer who never looked her directly in the eyes. She also remembered Rex refusing to leave the front door every night for almost 6 straight months afterward. Dogs know when someone is gone forever, but Rex had never acted like Ethan was gone. He acted like Ethan was missing. There was a difference. Lily gently knelt beside the German Shepherd and rested one small hand against his damp neck. "He only does this when he remembers somebody," she whispered. Ryan's face turned pale again. "Dogs remember differently than we do," Daniel Pierce muttered quietly, though it sounded more like he was speaking to himself. A sharp gust of wind swept through the courtyard, rattling the memorial flags overhead while thunder rolled farther away toward the river. The ceremony speaker began reading names near the main stage, his solemn voice drifting through hidden loudspeakers across the grounds. Every few seconds another family stood to place flowers beneath engraved stone. Life and grief moving side by side. Commander Mercer finally stepped closer to Claire. "There is a reception hall inside the visitors' center," he said carefully. "Warm coffee. Private seating. We should continue there." Claire studied all 5 men for a long moment before nodding slowly. She did not trust them. Not anymore. But she needed answers too badly to walk away. As the group began moving toward the stone pathway leading inside, Rex suddenly stopped again, completely still. His ears lifted sharply toward the western side of the memorial grounds where rows of black SUVs sat parked beneath dripping oak trees. Ryan noticed the reaction immediately. "What is it?" Travis whispered nervously. Rex stared into the mist for several seconds without blinking. Then a low sound rose in his throat. Not aggressive. Alert. The kind of warning military dogs give before storms or danger. Ryan's breathing slowed. He remembered that sound too well. Northern Syria. The abandoned compound. Smoke drifting through shattered walls while Rex suddenly froze beside a collapsed stairwell moments before everything spiraled into chaos. Ethan trusted the dog instantly. Ryan had not. That memory still haunted him. "Come on, buddy," Lily whispered gently, tugging the leash. Rex finally obeyed, but reluctantly. As they crossed the memorial courtyard, Claire noticed something else strange. Every time Ryan moved too far ahead, Rex would quietly reposition himself between Ryan and Lily, watching him, tracking him, like the dog no longer trusted the man he once served beside. The visitors' center stood warm against the storm outside, its tall windows glowing amber beneath hanging lanterns. Inside, the scent of coffee, wet wool, and polished wood wrapped around the room, while veterans quietly gathered near framed photographs lining the walls. Most images showed smiling service members beside helicopters, ships, and military working dogs. One photograph near the entrance made Claire stop walking entirely. Ethan stood in the center wearing desert camouflage beneath harsh Middle Eastern sunlight. Younger, stronger, smiling beside Ryan Holt with one arm resting over Rex's shoulders. The tattoo was visible even there on Ethan's right forearm. A German Shepherd with one scar over the ear. Lily stared at the photograph with wide eyes. "That is Daddy," she whispered softly. Ryan looked away immediately. He could not bear the picture anymore. Not after all these years. Claire slowly approached the frame, fingertips trembling as she brushed dust from the corner of the glass. "I never saw this one before." Commander Mercer's expression darkened. "It was taken 3 days before the operation." Silence settled again. Then Lily looked up at Ryan. "Were you his best friend?" she asked innocently. Ryan swallowed hard. "I was supposed to be." The answer hit the room like cold steel. Even Commander Mercer lowered his eyes. Rex quietly walked forward until he stood beneath the photograph, staring up at Ethan's smiling face with aching stillness. The old German Shepherd's tail lowered slowly against the polished floor while his breathing turned shallow. Claire felt her chest tighten. "He misses him," she whispered. "Every day," Ryan replied before he could stop himself. The room fell silent again after that, because the way he said it sounded nothing like memory. It sounded like guilt. And somewhere deep inside himself, Ryan Holt already knew the truth could not stay buried much longer. The coffee inside the visitors' center had gone cold long ago, but nobody seemed to notice anymore. Rain slid slowly down the tall windows overlooking the memorial grounds while muted conversations drifted through nearby rooms filled with veterans and grieving families. Yet inside the smaller side lounge near the photograph wall, silence sat heavier than the storm outside. Claire Harper remained standing beneath Ethan's picture, arms folded tightly across her coat as though holding herself together by force alone. Lily sat quietly beside Rex near the stone fireplace, her small fingers buried deep in the thick fur around the old German shepherd's neck. The dog had not taken his eyes off Ryan Holt for nearly 10 straight minutes. Not once. Ryan leaned against the far coffee table with both hands pressed flat against the polished wood, shoulders lowered beneath invisible weight. The overhead lights painted faint silver into the scar tissue near his wrist where the edge of the tattoo disappeared beneath his sleeve. Commander Mercer finally removed his wet coat and exhaled slowly. 8 years, he muttered quietly. I prayed this day would never come. Claire looked toward him sharply. What exactly is that supposed to mean? Mercer hesitated. Years of military discipline still fought inside him, old instincts warning him not to speak carelessly. But there was something about Ethan's daughter sitting only a few feet away beside the dog that made silence feel wrong now. Almost sinful. Daniel Pierce walked toward the fireplace and stared into the low flames. The mission was called Raven Echo, he said softly. Officially, it never existed. Claire's face hardened immediately. And unofficially? Daniel swallowed. Unofficially, it changed every man in this room. Outside, thunder rolled low across Arlington while rainwater dripped steadily from the oak trees lining the memorial paths. Somewhere in the distance, a helicopter passed through the gray sky, its faint blades humming like memory. Ryan finally spoke without lifting his head. Ethan was team leader. Lily looked up immediately at the sound of her father's name. Ryan noticed her small blue eyes watching him and nearly lost the ability to continue. Your father, he said carefully, was the best man I ever knew. Claire closed her eyes briefly. Ethan's old teammates had all said similar things over the years. Brave, loyal, selfless. But praise had never answered the one question she carried every night since the Navy car arrived at her house. What really happened to him? Rex suddenly stood and crossed the room slowly toward Ryan. No hesitation now, just certainty. The German shepherd stopped directly beside him and pressed his nose lightly against Ryan's injured wrist where the tattoo disappeared beneath scar tissue. Ryan physically flinched. He keeps doing that, Lily whispered softly. Why? No one answered her. Because all 5 seals knew exactly why. Dogs remember. Through scent. Through heartbeat. Through fragments humans overlook. Rex was not reacting to ink. He was reacting to Ethan. Or what remained of him. Commander Mercer lowered himself slowly into a leather chair near the window, suddenly looking far older than his 60 years. The convoy was compromised before we even arrived, he said quietly. Wrong intel. Wrong extraction point. Everything collapsed fast. As he spoke, the room seemed to darken around the memory itself. Northern Syria. Endless desert under a moonless sky. Heat trapped inside shattered buildings, while radio static hissed through the dark like snakes. Claire listened without blinking. There was an explosion near the south corridor. Travis Boone added softly. Ryan took the worst of it. Ryan's jaw tightened. His fingers curled against the edge of the table. Mason Reed stared down into his untouched coffee cup. Ethan pulled him out. Silence followed that sentence. Heavy silence. Lily stroked Rex gently behind the ears while trying to understand words adults never explained properly around children. Injuries. Missions. Sacrifice. All those quiet grown-up words that usually meant someone never came home. Daniel Pierce continued quietly. The medevac bird only had a few minutes before enemy movement closed in around the compound. Claire noticed something then. Every single man avoided looking directly at Ryan whenever the story moved closer to Ethan's final moments. Like orbiting around a wound nobody wanted reopened. And my husband? She asked carefully. Ryan shut his eyes. The smell hit him first. Smoke. Dust. Burning electrical wires. Then Ethan's voice through the ringing chaos. Come even then. Get him out first. Ryan remembered trying to argue. Remembered Ethan shoving the emergency beacon into his vest with blood on his hands, and that stubborn half-smile he always wore before dangerous missions. You have a daughter waiting at home too, Ryan had told him. Ethan laughed softly despite everything. Yeah, he had answered. Which means one of us better survive to tell her I tried. Ryan opened his eyes again inside the visitor's center, but his breathing had changed. Shallower now. He saved me, he whispered. Claire's lips trembled slightly. Then why does it feel like nobody here believes he died? The question landed hard enough to empty the room of sound. Even the rain outside seemed quieter afterward. Rex slowly lowered himself beside Ryan's feet, though the dog's eyes remained fixed upward on him, waiting, judging. Ryan looked down at the old German shepherd and finally whispered the thing he had never said out loud in 8 years. Because we never saw him die. Claire froze completely. Lily stopped petting Rex. Commander Mercer lowered his head into one weathered hand, while Travis Boone stared toward the floor like a man preparing for impact. The fireplace crackled softly in the corner, warm light flickering across military photographs and folded flags lining the walls. Claire's voice came out barely above a whisper. "What did you just say?" Ryan swallowed hard, guilt rising visibly across his face now, like floodwater finally breaking through stone. When the helicopter lifted off, he paused. His throat tightened. Ethan was still alive. The room fell utterly silent. Even the dog did not move. Somewhere beyond the rain-covered windows, another trumpet began playing across Arlington Cemetery. Slow, morning notes drifting through gray air while a little girl sat frozen beside a German shepherd who had apparently spent 8 years waiting for someone brave enough to tell the truth. The words lingered inside the room long after Ryan Holt spoke them, hanging in the warm air beside the smell of rain and fireplace smoke like something alive. Ethan was still alive. Claire Harper stared at him without blinking, her face drained pale beneath the amber light of the visitor's center. For 8 years, she had prepared herself to live with loss. Widows learn how to survive absence. But uncertainty was different. Uncertainty kept the wound breathing. Lily slowly looked up from beside Rex, confusion clouding her small face. "Daddy was alive?" she whispered softly. No one answered immediately, because none of the men knew how to explain to a child that war sometimes leaves people behind long before their hearts stop beating. Outside, rain slid down. The tall windows, while distant headlights moved through the gray afternoon beyond Arlington Cemetery. The memorial crowd had begun thinning as families returned home, carrying folded programs and damp bouquets. But inside the side lounge, time itself seemed unwilling to move forward. Commander Mercer rubbed both hands across his weathered face and finally spoke in a voice roughened by age and regret. The extraction point collapsed faster than expected, he said quietly. We lost communications. Air support was delayed. Visibility dropped. We were surrounded by smoke and debris. Claire's eyes never left Ryan. But you said he was alive. Ryan swallowed hard. He was. The answer came so quickly it startled even him. Rex slowly rose from the floor and moved closer again, resting beside Ryan's chair without touching him, watching him, waiting for more. The old German shepherd's ears twitched each time Ryan spoke Ethan's name, as though every syllable reopened some hidden place inside the dog's memory. Daniel Pierce stepped toward the windows, staring out into the rain. Ethan refused to leave Rex behind, he said softly. Lily's attention shifted instantly toward him. Daddy took Rex on missions? Daniel nodded faintly. Only special operations. Ethan trusted him more than most people. A faint smile almost touched Claire's lips at that. That sounded exactly like Ethan. Back home, he used to joke that Rex had better instincts than half the officers he served under. He trained the dog patiently for years in their backyard outside Norfolk, while Lily watched from the porch wrapped in blankets too large for her tiny shoulders. Rex had slept beside Ethan's side of the bed every night after deployment. And after Ethan disappeared, the dog stopped sleeping comfortably at all. Ryan stared down at the tattoo hidden beneath his sleeve and finally whispered, "The blast burned through my arm." Claire's gaze shifted immediately toward him again. "Ethan pulled me out before the fire spread." Mason Reed lowered his head. Travis Boone closed his eyes briefly. None of them interrupted because they already knew where this story led. Ryan continued quietly. "The medic said I would lose the skin completely." His fingers trembled slightly now. There was no time for proper surgery in the field hospital. They used emergency grafting. Claire's breathing slowed. Somewhere deep inside her, pieces were beginning to connect in ways she did not want to understand. Ryan carefully rolled his sleeve upward for the first time since entering the building. Lily gasped softly beside Rex. The tattoo stretched unevenly across scarred skin near Ryan's wrist and forearm, burned in places, distorted in others, but unmistakably the same tattoo Ethan had carried for years. A German shepherd with one scar over the year. Claire stepped forward slowly, her heartbeat suddenly loud enough to feel. No, she whispered. Ryan nodded once, eyes fixed on the floor. The graft came from Ethan. Silence swallowed the room whole. Even the fireplace seemed quieter afterward. Lily stared at the tattoo with wide, uncertain eyes while Rex slowly approached Ryan's exposed arm. The dog sniffed the scar tissue once. Then again, very carefully. And for the first time since Arlington that afternoon, Rex's posture changed completely. His rigid focus softened into something deeper. Sadder. Recognition. Claire covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Oh my God. Ryan looked physically ill now. I did not know at first, he admitted quietly. Nobody told me where the tissue came from until months later. Commander Mercer stared toward the floor. The field surgeons made the decision during emergency triage. And then what? Claire asked, her voice barely steady. Ryan closed his eyes briefly as old memories flooded back through him. White hospital walls. Morphine haze. Endless nights staring at the ceiling while Ethan's last radio transmission replayed over and over inside his skull. Then the classified debriefing. The signatures. The orders. Move forward. Mission closed. I asked to go back for him, Ryan whispered. Every day after recovery, I asked. Claire's eyes filled slowly with tears she had spent years refusing to shed in front of strangers. But you never did. Ryan shook his head once. The region fell apart after extraction. Intelligence lost the compound within. 48 hours. Daniel Pierce finally turned from the windows. Officially, there was no recoverable evidence. Claire laughed softly then, though there was no humor inside it. Only heartbreak. Officially, the word cut through the room like broken glass. Lily quietly walked toward Ryan before anyone could stop her. Her small boots made almost no sound against the polished floor. She looked down at the tattoo for several long seconds while Rex remained close beside her. Then she asked the question none of the grown men there were brave enough to say aloud. Did Daddy know he was not coming home? Ryan's eyes immediately filled. The answer lived inside him every day already. Ethan lying against shattered concrete beneath drifting smoke. Breathing hard, but still conscious. Looking toward the helicopter lifting into the dark sky. Not angry. Not afraid. Just tired. Ryan remembered Ethan pressing the emergency flare into his chest and saying the final thing that still haunted every quiet room afterward. Take care of my family if I cannot. Ryan's voice nearly failed him now. He knew the risk. Lily lowered her gaze toward the floor. Rex gently nudged her hand with his nose, and the little girl wrapped both arms around the old German shepherd's neck without speaking. Claire watched them for a long moment before finally looking back at Ryan Holt. You have been carrying my husband's skin on your arm for 8 years, she whispered softly. Ryan could not answer, because no punishment anyone could give him had ever hurt more than living with that truth already. Rain tapped softly against the tall windows as evening settled over Arlington in shades of blue and silver. The visitors' center had grown quieter now, most families already gone, leaving only distant footsteps and the faint hum of fluorescent lights drifting through the memorial halls. Inside the side lounge, nobody seemed willing to move first. Claire Harper stood near the fireplace with tears shining silently in her tired blue eyes while Lily remained beside Rex, one small hand still resting gently along the old German shepherd's neck. Ryan Holt sat motionless across from them, his rolled sleeve exposing the scarred tattoo that no longer felt like skin at all. It felt like judgment. The fire crackled softly behind Claire, warm light flickering across the framed military photographs lining the walls. Ethan's smiling face remained frozen inside the picture near the entrance, forever younger than the people mourning him, forever unfinished. Commander Mercer slowly rose from his chair and crossed toward the coffee counter, though his hands trembled faintly while pouring another cup. Age had not weakened him nearly as much as guilt had. There is more, he said quietly without turning around. Ryan's eyes shut immediately. Cole, she deserves the truth. The older man's voice carried no anger, only exhaustion. Claire straightened slowly. What truth? No one answered right away, because the next part hurt the worst. Daniel Pierce finally stepped closer to the windows, watching rainwater slide down the glass while distant headlights glowed beyond the cemetery gates. Rex never left the compound, he said softly. Lily looked up instantly. What do you mean? Daniel swallowed hard. After extraction, we thought the dog was gone too. Ryan lowered his head into both hands. The memory returned with brutal clarity. The helicopter cabin is shaking violently beneath storm winds. Sand and smoke swallowing the desert below, while medics fought to stabilize injuries under dim red emergency lights. Ryan drifting in and out of consciousness. Ethan missing, then suddenly barking. Faint at first, barely audible through rotor noise. Rex, running beneath the aircraft as long as he physically could through the collapsing streets below. Ryan still heard it at night sometimes. That sound. Loyalty refusing to surrender. The pilot said the dog chased the bird nearly half a mile. Travis Boone whispered quietly. Claire covered her mouth again. Oh God. Rex disappeared after that. Mason Reed added. Search teams never found him. Lily stared down at the German shepherd beside her, stunned. You went back for Daddy? Rex lifted his amber eyes toward the little girl as though he understood every word. His tail moved once against the wooden floor. Slow. Gentle. Claire suddenly remembered the morning Rex returned home nearly 3 months after Ethan was declared missing. Thin, exhausted, covered in desert dust and old scars no veterinarian could fully explain. The Navy handlers who brought him back offered no details except that he had been located near a refugee transport route outside Turkey. Claire had cried for nearly an hour holding the dog that night, because somewhere deep down she believed Rex had carried part of Ethan home with him. Now she realized how literal that might have been. Ryan looked toward the dog again, his voice barely steady. He would not let medics touch him for weeks after they found him. Lily frowned softly. Why? Ryan's throat tightened. Because he was waiting for Ethan. Silence settled heavily through the room once more. Outside, the rain finally began easing into a soft mist drifting beneath the cemetery lights. Somewhere far across the memorial grounds, a lone maintenance worker folded chairs beneath the darkening sky, while distant thunder faded toward the horizon. Claire slowly sat down beside Lily for the first time since entering the visitor's center. She looked exhausted now, not physically, spiritually. Like every answer she received only deepened the ache instead of healing it. All these years, she whispered softly. Rex kept sleeping beside Ethan's closet. Ryan nodded faintly. Dogs do not understand classified reports. The words nearly broke Claire completely. Lily gently wrapped her arms around Rex's neck again, burying her face into the thick sable fur while the old German shepherd remained perfectly still for her. Ryan watched them quietly, pain carving deeper into his face with every passing second. Because Ethan should have been there instead. Ethan should have watched his daughter grow up. Ethan should have come home to birthdays and Christmas mornings and school plays and ordinary life. Ryan had received all of those things while Ethan disappeared into silence. Commander Mercer returned slowly from the coffee counter, carrying an old brown file folder worn soft at the edges. The moment Ryan saw it, his entire body stiffened. No, he whispered immediately. Mercer ignored him and placed the folder carefully onto the table between Claire and Lily. What is that? Claire asked. Mercer exhaled slowly. The final field report. Ryan looked physically sick now. That file was sealed. It should not have been. Mercer's weathered eyes drifted toward Ethan's photograph near the wall. Not after today. Claire hesitated before opening the folder carefully. Inside sat faded operation maps, mission timestamps, weather reports, and several grainy surveillance photographs blurred by dust and distance. Lily leaned closer curiously while Rex quietly rested his head against her knee. Then Claire stopped breathing entirely. One photograph near the bottom showed a dark figure moving through smoke beside a German shepherd under night vision graying. Ethan, alive, walking. The timestamp beneath the image read nearly 40 minutes after official extraction. Claire's fingers began trembling violently. This cannot be real. Ryan stared at the floor. It is. Commander Mercer spoke softly now, almost like confession. Satellite surveillance picked up movement after the helicopter left the area. Claire looked up sharply. Then why was no rescue team sent back? Nobody answered immediately, because every man in that room already carried the answer like a wound. Budget, politics, risk assessment, command decisions made safely inside distant offices while soldiers disappeared overseas. Ryan finally lifted his eyes toward Claire, and for the first time all night, there was nothing left inside them except shame. Because they believed he would not survive until morning. Claire's voice cracked instantly. But he was alive. Ryan nodded once, tears finally breaking free down his face. and he knew we left him there. Rex suddenly stood and walked slowly toward Ethan's photograph again. The old German shepherd stared upward at the smiling image beneath warm firelight, while silence filled the room like prayer. Then quietly, almost heartbreakingly, Rex let out the same soft broken whine he made at the memorial earlier that day. The sound of a loyal soul still waiting for someone who never stopped being his family. The photograph trembled slightly in Claire Harper's hands as the firelight flickered across the grainy image of Ethan moving through smoke beside Rex. Alive. 40 minutes after extraction. For 8 years, she had forced herself to mourn a man she now realized might have spent his final hours waiting for people who never came back. The realization hollowed the air from her lungs. Lily sat frozen beside the fireplace, her blue eyes moving between the photograph and the old German shepherd standing beneath Ethan's framed portrait. Rex had not made another sound since the soft whine escaped him moments earlier, but sorrow clung visibly to the dog now. Heavy, ancient, like grief had settled into his bones long ago and simply learned to stay there quietly. Ryan Holt could no longer look at the photograph. His eyes remained fixed on the scarred tattoo across his forearm, while rainwater traced silver lines down the dark windows behind him. The visitor center had nearly emptied completely now. Only distant custodians and fading memorial lights remained beyond the quiet halls of Arlington. Commander Mercer lowered himself back into the leather chair near the fireplace and stared into the flames for several long seconds before speaking again. The final transmission came at 0214, he said softly. Very weak signal. Fragmented audio. Claire slowly looked up. What did he say? Mercer hesitated. Ryan shut his eyes immediately like a man bracing for impact. Mason Reed quietly rubbed both hands together while Daniel Pierce stepped farther into the shadows near the windows. None of them had ever forgotten that transmission. Some nights it still woke them from sleep. Commander Mercer finally answered. He asked if the team made it out safely. Claire's expression collapsed. Not anger. Not yet. Something sadder. Ethan's last concern had not been himself. Of course it had not. Ryan remembered the exact moment the radio crackled inside the field command vehicle hours after extraction. Storm interference. Static. Then Ethan's voice cutting through the noise barely above a whisper. Weak. Exhausted. But calm. Tell Claire. The signal broke there. For 8 years Ryan had replayed those 2 words more times than he could count. Tell Claire. What? Tell Claire he loved her? Tell Claire he tried? Tell Claire he was still alive? The unfinished sentence haunted him more than nightmares ever could. Why did nobody tell me this? Claire asked quietly. Commander Mercer looked down at his weathered hands. Because command determined the signal was unreliable. Claire laughed softly again, though tears now slid openly down her face. Unreliable. The words sounded poisonous in her mouth. Lily looked toward her mother with frightened confusion. Mom. Claire immediately wiped her face and forced a trembling smile toward her daughter. I am okay, sweetheart. But she was not. 8 years of grief had suddenly transformed into something far more painful. Hope. Tiny, dangerous hope. Rex slowly crossed the room again and stopped beside Claire this time, pressing his head gently against her knee. Claire instinctively buried one shaking hand into the thick fur around his neck, while fresh tears slipped silently down her cheeks. You knew, did you not? She whispered softly to the dog. You always knew. Ryan stared at the scene with visible anguish. Because somewhere inside himself he had always believed the same thing. Dogs do not wait for ghosts the way Rex waited for Ethan. They wait for people they expect to return. Commander Mercer carefully reached into the brown folder again and removed a smaller sealed envelope yellowed slightly with age. The moment Ryan saw it, his face lost all remaining color. Sir, he whispered urgently. Mercer ignored him and handed the envelope toward Claire. This was recovered with Rex when he resurfaced near the Turkish border. Claire hesitated before taking it carefully. The envelope looked weather-worn and stained along the corners as though it had traveled through terrible places before arriving here. Across the front, written in faded black marker, were only 2 words. For Claire. Her breath caught instantly. No, Ryan lowered his head completely now. We thought it was damaged beyond recovery. Claire's trembling fingers slowly opened the envelope while Lily watched beside her in silence. Inside rested a small silver St. Michael medallion hanging from a broken chain. Ethan's chain. Claire recognized it immediately because she had given it to him before his first deployment after Lily was born. Her vision blurred instantly. Beneath the medallion sat one folded piece of paper worn soft with dirt and water damage. Claire unfolded it carefully while the room fell completely still around her. Most of the writing had faded beyond recognition, but several lines remained visible through smeared ink. Claire's lips trembled as she read silently. Then she stopped breathing altogether. Ryan looked up slowly. "What does it say?" Claire could barely force the words out. "If Rex finds his way home," her voice broke. She swallowed hard and tried again. "Tell Lily I carried her picture every day." Lily's eyes filled immediately. Claire continued reading through tears. "Tell her, brave does not mean you are not scared." The final line was smeared badly by water damage, but a few words remained visible near the bottom. "Love you both always." Claire pressed the note against her chest as silent sobs finally overtook the composure she had carried for nearly a decade. Lily moved instantly into her mother's arms while Rex stood pressed against both of them protectively, unmoving. Ryan turned away toward the dark windows because he could no longer bear watching the pain he helped create. Outside, the rain had finally stopped completely. Arlington Cemetery shimmered beneath wet lantern light and drifting mist, while rows of white headstones glowed faintly against the darkness like sleeping soldiers beneath heaven's watch. Daniel Pierce quietly spoke from near the windows. There was one more thing in the report. Nobody answered him immediately. He looked toward Ryan first before continuing softly. Thermal surveillance picked up 2 heat signatures leaving the compound together. Claire slowly lifted her tear-streaked face. 2. Daniel nodded once. "Ethan and someone else." Silence crashed through the room harder than thunder. Ryan stared at him in disbelief. Commander Mercer's expression darkened immediately. That detail was never confirmed. "Neither was Ethan's death," Daniel replied quietly. Rex suddenly lifted his head sharply toward the windows again. Alert. Focused. The old German shepherd's ears rose slowly, while his entire posture changed in an instant. Lily noticed first. "Rex." The dog stepped away from the fireplace and stared into the dark parking lot beyond the rain-streaked glass. Then, for the first time all night, his tail moved. Once. Slow. Hopeful. The room changed the moment Rex's tail moved. It was subtle. Just one slow motion against the polished wooden floor. But every man in that visitor center noticed it instantly, because military dogs did not give hope away carelessly. Especially not after years of grief. Claire Harper slowly rose from the couch beside the fireplace, still clutching Ethan's faded note against her chest, while Lily stood close beside her with wide, uncertain eyes. Outside the tall, rain-streaked windows, the Arlington parking lot sat mostly empty beneath silver mist and pale street lamps. Rows of dark vehicles glistened under the lingering drizzle while wind stirred fallen leaves across wet pavement. Rex remained completely focused on something beyond the glass. Ears raised, breathing slow, listening. Ryan Holt stepped closer to the windows despite the visible tension tightening through his shoulders. "What does he see?" Travis Boone whispered quietly. Nobody answered because nobody knew. But the old German shepherd's posture had changed too sharply to ignore. Commander Mercer moved carefully toward the glass as well, his weathered eyes narrowing into the darkness outside. The mist drifted low across the parking lot now, softening shapes beneath the lamps into blurry shadows. Then Rex suddenly stood fully upright. Alert. Ready. Lily tightened her grip on the leash instinctively. "Rex." The dog did not react to her voice. His amber eyes stayed locked on a single point near the far row of parked vehicles beside the cemetery fence line. Ryan's breathing grew shallow again. Somewhere deep inside himself, fear and hope had begun colliding in ways he could barely survive. Because there was only one reason Rex would react like this. One scent, one memory, one person. The automatic doors at the far end of the visitor's center opened briefly as a maintenance worker exited. Into the night carrying folded chairs. Cold wind swept through the hallway carrying the scent of rain, wet earth, and distant pine into the building. Rex inhaled sharply. Then everything changed. The old German shepherd let out a sudden deep bark that echoed through the quiet visitor's center hard enough to freeze every heartbeat in the room. Not warning, not aggression, recognition. Lily gasped softly. Ryan physically staggered backward one step. And before anyone could react, Rex lunged forward toward the windows with strength none of them thought the aging dog still possessed. "Rex!" Claire shouted instinctively as the leash slipped from Lily's small hands. The German Shepherd raced through the visitors' center lobby, claws skidding across polished floors while startled visitors turned in confusion. Commander Mercer immediately followed while the others rushed after him through the dim hallway. Outside, cold mist wrapped around Arlington Cemetery in pale drifting ribbons beneath the night sky. Rex burst through the automatic doors and into the parking lot without hesitation, sprinting directly toward the far fence line near the oak trees. Rainwater splashed beneath his paws while the leash trailed wildly behind him across wet pavement. "Rex!" Lily cried again, running after him despite Claire calling her back. Ryan reached her first, gently stopping the little girl before she slipped on the rain-slick concrete. The parking lot felt strangely silent except for distant traffic and the soft hiss of rainwater dripping from tree branches overhead. Rex finally stopped near an older dark pickup truck parked beneath a flickering street lamp at the edge of the cemetery fence. The engine was off. No movement inside. Yet the dog stood frozen before it, tail slowly wagging now with disbelief and desperate hope. Commander Mercer approached carefully. "Stay back," he warned quietly out of instinct more than fear. Ryan could barely breathe anymore. Every nerve inside him screamed against what his heart wanted to believe. The truck windows were fogged slightly from moisture, while shadows blurred the interior beneath weak yellow light. Rex stepped closer. Then gently, heartbreakingly, he pressed his nose against the driver's side door and whimpered. The sound nearly destroyed Ryan where he stood, because he had heard Rex make that exact sound only once before. The day Ethan first came home from deployment and surprised the dog outside the Norfolk house at sunrise. Claire slowly covered her mouth again, trembling visibly now beneath her rain-soaked coat. "No," she whispered. "This cannot." The driver's side door opened suddenly. Everyone froze. A man stepped slowly out into the cold Arlington mist. Tall, broad-shouldered beneath a worn dark jacket faded by years of weather and travel. A thick beard streaked with gray partially shadowed his face, while long scars traced faintly beneath tired eyes that looked older than the rest of him. His dark hair had silver near the temples now. His posture carried the stiffness of old injuries and harder years. But even beneath the rain and age and silence, Claire knew him instantly. Ethan Vale looked like a ghost that had walked too far through suffering to fully belong among the living anymore. Nobody moved. Nobody breathed. Even the wind seemed to stop beneath the cemetery lights. Ethan's eyes slowly found Claire first, then Lily, and finally Rex. The old German Shepherd made one broken sound deep in his chest before running forward fully this time. Ethan dropped to one knee instinctively as Rex crashed into him through the rain, whining uncontrollably while pressing against his chest with trembling relief. Ethan wrapped both arms around the dog immediately, burying his face into the wet sable fur as his entire body shook. "Hey, buddy," he whispered hoarsely. I know. Ryan stared at the scene like a man watching the impossible unfold in front of him. Tears blurred his vision instantly. Mason Reed physically sat down against the curb because his legs no longer held him upright. Travis Boone turned away completely, both hands covering his face. Commander Mercer closed his eyes beneath the rain as though prayer itself had finally answered after 8 brutal years. Claire still had not moved. Ethan slowly rose to his feet again, while Rex remained pressed tightly beside him, refusing to let even an inch separate them. Then Ethan looked at Claire fully for the first time. The years between them seemed to collapse all at once beneath the silver mist and cemetery lights. Claire's lips trembled violently. "Ethan." His eyes filled immediately at the sound of her voice. Same voice. Same woman. Just older now. More tired. Carrying 8 years of mourning she should never have endured. Ethan tried to speak, but emotion caught hard in his throat before words could form. Then Lily stepped slowly out from behind Ryan Holt. Small, blonde-haired, blue-eyed. Not the toddler Ethan remembered anymore. His daughter stood staring at him beneath the rain while the old German Shepherd leaned silently against his side like a loyal witness finally bringing a lost soul home. For a moment, nobody in the Arlington parking lot remembered how to breathe. Rain dripped softly from the oak branches overhead, while pale cemetery lights shimmered against wet pavement and mist. Ethan Vale stood motionless beside the old pickup truck with Rex pressed tightly against him, one weathered hand buried deep in the German Shepherd's soaked fur as though afraid the dog might disappear if he let go. But it was Lily who held him frozen completely. 8 years, 8 birthdays, 8 Christmas mornings missed. And suddenly there she was standing beneath the rain only a few yards away, no longer the tiny child from the photograph he carried through deserts and safe houses and sleepless nights. She looked like Claire now. Same blue eyes. Same quiet sadness around the corners when she tried not to cry. Ethan's chest tightened painfully. Lily stared at him in silence for several seconds while the rain mist drifted between them. Daddy. The word nearly broke him where he stood. Ethan's eyes shut briefly as emotion crashed through him harder than any battlefield memory ever had. He had imagined this moment 1,000 different ways during endless nights overseas, but none of those imagined reunions prepared him for hearing his daughter's voice again. Older now. Softer. Real. Claire stepped forward instinctively, tears streaming freely down her face. Ethan. He looked toward her slowly, and every year of distance seemed visible between them. Claire noticed the scars first. Faint pale lines along his jaw and neck. The stiffness in the way he held his left shoulder. The exhaustion buried deep behind his eyes. But beneath all of it, he was still Ethan. Still the man who used to carry Lily through the kitchen while making Saturday pancakes badly on purpose just to hear her laugh. Ryan Holt remained several feet away beside the visitor's center entrance, completely unable to move. Shame and disbelief twisted visibly across his face, while Ethan finally noticed him standing there beneath the rain. Their eyes met. Neither man spoke. Too much history existed inside that silence already. Rex shifted slightly between them, sensing the tension instantly. But Ethan gently rested one hand against the dog's neck, calming him. "It is okay, buddy," he whispered softly. Ryan's eyes filled immediately at the sound of Ethan's voice directed toward the dog exactly the same way it used to be years ago. Nothing about it had changed. Claire slowly approached until only a few feet separated them now. Up close, Ethan looked thinner than she remembered. Harder too. Like survival itself had slowly carved pieces away from him over time. Her voice trembled violently. "You are alive." Ethan nodded once, though grief moved through his expression instead of relief. "I tried to come home." Claire covered her mouth again as fresh tears fell freely down her cheeks. 8 years, Ethan. He lowered his eyes toward the wet pavement. "I know." Lily took one hesitant step forward beside Rex. "Did you really carry my picture?" Ethan looked at her instantly. Everything else around him disappeared then. The cemetery, the rain, the guilt standing 20 feet away in a navy coat. All of it faded beside the miracle of hearing his daughter ask him a question again. Slowly, Ethan reached into the inside pocket of his weather-worn jacket and pulled out a small plastic sleeve faded by time. Inside rested an old photograph bent softly at the corners. A little blonde-haired toddler sitting on his shoulders at a Virginia beach beneath bright summer sunlight. Lily gasped quietly. Claire's knees nearly gave out beneath her. Ethan's voice came rough and low. "Every day." Lily stared at the photograph for several long seconds before tears finally spilled down her face too. Then suddenly she ran toward him. Ethan barely had time to kneel before his daughter threw both arms around his neck beneath the cold Arlington rain. The sound Ethan made holding her again was not quite a sob and not quite relief. Something deeper. A soul finally finding its way back to itself after years of darkness. Rex immediately pressed close against both of them, whining softly while his tail moved hard enough to shake rainwater through the mist. Claire turned away briefly because the sight hurt too beautifully to survive all at once. Commander Mercer quietly removed his cap beside the visitors' center doors while Mason Reed wiped both eyes with shaking hands. Travis Boone simply stared toward heaven as if trying to understand how mercy still existed after everything they had done wrong. Ryan Holt remained motionless. Ethan finally looked toward him again over Lily's shoulder. The old friendship between them lingered there beneath years of guilt and silence like embers refusing to die completely. Ryan swallowed hard. "I thought," his voice failed. He tried again. "I thought you were gone." Ethan held Lily tightly for another second before carefully helping her back to the ground. "I almost was." Silence settled between the two men again, while rain dripped steadily from Ethan's jacket sleeves. Ryan stared at the scarred tattoo along his own forearm, unable to hide it anymore. Ethan noticed immediately. His expression changed slightly. Pain, recognition, understanding. So that is where it went, he said quietly. Ryan physically flinched. But Ethan slowly shook his head before he could continue. You survived. No accusation. No anger. Somehow that hurt Ryan even worse. I left you there, Ryan whispered brokenly. Ethan looked away toward the cemetery lights, shimmering through mist and rain. You followed orders. I should have stayed. Ethan's tired eyes drifted back toward him. Then Lily would have lost 2 fathers that night instead of 1. Ryan's composure shattered. Completely after that. He covered his face with one trembling hand while tears mixed with rain across his cheeks. Rex quietly walked over and sat beside him again, pressing against his leg with calm, steady loyalty despite everything. Ryan looked down at the dog in disbelief. After all this, he whispered hoarsely, you still forgive me? Ethan answered softly before Rex could. That is what dogs do. The rain finally began easing into a soft silver mist around them, while Arlington Cemetery glowed peacefully beneath the dark Virginia sky. Lily slipped one small hand into Ethan's rough, scarred fingers while Claire stepped beside them slowly, still afraid this moment might disappear if she blinked too hard. Ethan looked at his family standing beside him beneath the drifting rain and lowered his head briefly as emotion overtook him again. I dreamed about this every night, he whispered. Every single night. The mist drifted softly across Arlington Cemetery, as if the night itself was trying not to disturb the miracle unfolding beneath its quiet lights. Ethan Vale stood beside Claire and Lily with Rex pressed faithfully against his leg, while rainwater continued dripping from the old oak branches overhead. Somewhere beyond the cemetery fence, distant traffic hummed through Washington like another world entirely unaware that a man declared dead 8 years earlier had just come home. Lily still held tightly to Ethan's hand, as though letting go might cause him to disappear again. Every few seconds, she glanced up at his face almost nervously, making certain he was still real. Ethan noticed it immediately. The realization cut through him harder than any memory from Syria ever could. His daughter had grown up learning not to trust hope too quickly. Claire remained close beside them, though emotion still trembled visibly beneath her composure. She wanted to touch him constantly, and not at all. Part of her still feared this was grief, playing cruel tricks beneath the rain and exhaustion. Ethan slowly turned toward the visitor's center. We should get inside, he said quietly. Lily is freezing. Only then did Claire notice how soaked they all were beneath the cold Virginia night. Lily's pale blue coat clung damply around her shoulders while Rex's sable fur dripped steadily onto the pavement. Commander Mercer nodded immediately. Come on. The group slowly returned toward the visitors' center beneath silver cemetery lights, though nobody walked normally anymore. The atmosphere around them had changed completely. Every step carried disbelief, wonder, guilt, grace. Ryan Holt stayed near the back beside Ethan, uncertain whether he even deserved to stand close to him anymore. Rex occasionally glanced over his shoulder at Ryan while walking, as though making certain neither man disappeared again. Inside the building, warmth wrapped around them instantly along with the smell of coffee, polished wood, and wet wool coats drying near the entrance. A young receptionist looked up briefly from behind the front desk and froze completely at the sight of Ethan before quickly lowering her gaze again, unsure if she had imagined him. Ethan kept his head lowered beneath the hood of his jacket while the group returned quietly to the side lounge near the fireplace. The room still carried the scent of smoke and old paper from the field reports scattered across the coffee table. Ethan stopped cold the moment he saw the open brown folder. His expression changed immediately. You kept the reports? Commander Mercer closed the folder slowly. I could not burn them. Ethan looked toward the photograph wall, where his smiling younger self still stared outward beside Ryan and Rex under Syrian sunlight. He barely recognized that man anymore. You should have, he whispered. Claire studied him carefully now. Why did you stay hidden? The question settled heavily into the room. Ethan remained silent for several seconds while Rex lowered himself onto the rug beside the fireplace with a tired groan. Lily instantly curled beside the old German shepherd, resting her head against his shoulder as if she had done it every night her entire life. Ethan watched them quietly before answering. The first year after Syria, I could barely remember my own name. Ryan slowly lowered himself into a chair nearby, unable to look away from Ethan now that he was truly there. Alive. Human. Scarred. Ethan continued softly. The people who found me near the border thought I was a refugee. His voice sounded distant now, carried partly by memory. No identification. No communications. No country willing to admit where I came from. Claire's eyes filled again. You could have contacted us eventually. Ethan nodded faintly. I tried. He reached slowly into his jacket pocket again and removed an old cracked flip phone held together near the hinge with black tape. 3 years after Syria, I finally got access to secure channels through a contractor in Turkey. Ryan frowned slightly. Then why? Ethan looked directly at him. Because by then, I learned the operation was buried intentionally. Silence fell again. Commander Mercer lowered his gaze immediately. Ethan walked slowly toward the windows overlooking Arlington Cemetery, hands buried deep in his pockets. Every official record declared me dead within 48 hours. Rain mist shimmered softly beyond the glass behind him. I realized somebody needed me to stay dead. Claire stared at him in disbelief. Who? Ethan shook his head slowly. I still do not know. The answer unsettled the room immediately. Mason Reed straightened from his chair, while Daniel Pierce exchanged a troubled glance with Travis Boone. Years of military instinct returned instantly to all of them. Ethan noticed. Relax, he said quietly. I did not come back for revenge. Ryan finally spoke. Then why now? Ethan looked toward Lily beside the fireplace. His tired expression softened immediately. Because today is her birthday. Claire's breath caught softly. Lily looked up instantly. You remembered? Ethan almost smiled then. June 15th. He knelt slowly beside her and brushed damp blonde hair gently from her forehead with rough, scarred fingers. You used to ask for chocolate pancakes every birthday morning. Lily's eyes widened. With whipped cream faces. Ethan nodded softly. And strawberries shaped like hearts because regular slices were apparently unacceptable. Lily suddenly laughed through tears for the first time all night. The sound hit Claire like sunlight after years of winter. Even Rex lifted his head, slightly at the sound, tail brushing softly against the rug. Ethan closed his eyes briefly, hearing his daughter laugh again. He had survived years of loneliness, carrying only memories like those through dark apartments overseas and nameless border towns where nobody knew he existed. Ryan watched the moment quietly before finally speaking the question that had haunted him since the parking lot. Why did you come to Arlington specifically? Ethan slowly opened his eyes again. Because Rex found me. Silence swallowed the room. Claire frowned softly. What? Ethan gently scratched behind Rex's ears while the old German shepherd leaned heavily into his hand. 3 months ago, I was living near Asheville under another name. His voice lowered with quiet disbelief. Then one morning, this stubborn old dog showed up outside my cabin like God himself had mailed him back to me. Lily gasped softly. Ryan stared in shock. Ethan smiled faintly through exhausted eyes. I have no idea how he tracked me across 2 states. Commander Mercer looked down toward Rex beside the fire. Neither do I. Ethan's expression softened deeply as he looked at the old German shepherd. He just walked up to my porch at sunrise and sat there staring at me like he had been angry for 8 years. Lily giggled quietly again while Rex thumped his tail once against the rug. Ethan exhaled softly and rested one hand against the dog's neck. Then I realized something. Claire stepped closer. What? Ethan looked at his family beneath the warm firelight while Arlington Cemetery shimmered peacefully outside the windows. If a dog could still find his way home after all this time, his voice trembled slightly now. Maybe I could too. The fire had burned lower by the time Ethan finished speaking, leaving the side lounge wrapped in soft amber shadows and quiet breathing. Outside the tall windows, Arlington Cemetery rested beneath drifting mist and silver street lamps, while the last traces of rain clung to marble headstones like tears refusing to dry. Nobody inside the visitors' center seemed eager to disturb the fragile peace settling slowly around Ethan and his family. Lily had fallen asleep curled beside Rex near the fireplace, one small hand buried in the old German shepherd's fur while the dog rested protectively against her with tired amber eyes half closed. Ethan watched them from across the room in complete silence, and for the first time since returning, some of the hardness inside his face began to loosen. Claire noticed immediately. You always said she slept better beside him, she whispered softly. Ethan nodded faintly without looking away from Lily. Rex used to wait outside her nursery every night. The memory drifted warmly between them for a moment. Simpler years. Before Syria. Before loss turned ordinary life into something sacred. Ryan Holt remained seated near the windows with both elbows resting against his knees, staring quietly at the scarred tattoo along his forearm. Every few seconds his eyes lifted toward Ethan like he still needed proof the man was truly alive. Commander Mercer finally broke the silence. You said somebody wanted you gone. Ethan leaned back slowly in the chair near the fireplace, exhaustion visible in every movement now. The operation in Syria was never what we were told it was. Mason Reed frowned slightly. What does that mean? Ethan's tired eyes drifted toward the old field reports still scattered across the coffee table. We were sent there to retrieve encrypted intelligence from a weapons broker. Daniel Pierce nodded slowly. That was the briefing. Ethan shook his head once. No, that was the cover story. Silence settled again. Even the crackling fireplace seemed quieter now. Ethan rubbed one hand slowly across his jaw before continuing. The intelligence we found connected several private contractors to illegal weapons routes operating through humanitarian corridors. Travis Boone straightened immediately. American contractors? Ethan nodded faintly. Some with government protection. Commander Mercer's face darkened. That was never in the official reports. Ethan looked directly at him. Because the reports were rewritten after we disappeared. Ryan stared toward the floor, realization moving visibly across his expression. That is why Command buried Raven Echo. Ethan did not answer immediately. He simply looked toward Lily sleeping beside Rex near the firelight. I stopped asking questions once I understood people were willing to erase entire teams to keep those answers hidden. Claire crossed her arms tightly. So you stayed hidden to protect us? Ethan finally looked at her fully again. Partly. His voice lowered. But mostly because I stopped believing I deserved to come home. The confession landed softly but painfully inside the room. Claire's eyes filled again, while Ryan physically looked away. Ethan continued quietly. I survived when good men did not. Ryan immediately shook his head. No, Ethan's gaze shifted toward him. You know it is true. You saved me. Ryan's voice cracked instantly. You saved all of us. Ethan exhaled slowly through his nose. And still I could not stop replaying that night. He looked down at his scarred hands resting loosely together. Every morning I woke up hearing helicopter blades leaving without me. The room fell silent except for the soft breathing of Lily asleep beside Rex. Claire slowly moved toward Ethan and sat beside him for the first time since the reunion. Neither spoke initially. They simply existed close together beneath the warm firelight, while years of grief and distance settled carefully between them. Ethan finally whispered, I wanted to call 1,000 times. Claire's voice trembled. Then why did you not? Ethan stared toward the windows where mist drifted across Arlington Cemetery like pale smoke. Because every version of you I imagined had already healed. Claire let out a quiet, broken laugh through tears. Ethan, I wore my wedding ring for 7 years. That finally shattered something inside him. Ethan lowered his head immediately while emotion tightened hard through his chest. Claire reached slowly for his hand then, hesitant at first, as though relearning someone once deeply familiar. His rough, scarred fingers closed around hers instantly. Natural. Automatic. Like 8 years had disappeared for one fragile second. Ryan quietly stood from his chair near the windows. I should leave. Ethan looked up immediately. Rex lifted his head too, ears twitching softly. Ryan's expression carried the exhaustion of a man who had punished himself for nearly a decade already. You should be with your family. Ethan studied him silently for several seconds before speaking. You already are family. Ryan shook his head hard. After what I did. You survived, Ethan interrupted gently. There is a difference. Ryan's eyes filled again. I abandoned you. Ethan slowly rose from the couch despite the stiffness in his shoulder and crossed the room toward him. The two men stood facing each other beneath soft firelight, while Arlington glowed quietly beyond the windows. Ryan, Ethan said softly, listen to me. Ryan finally lifted his eyes. Ethan's voice remained calm. Steady. The man who left Syria that night died every day afterward already. Silence swallowed the room again. Ethan gently touched the scarred tattoo along Ryan's forearm before continuing. You carried enough punishment. Ryan's composure collapsed completely after that. Tears spilled freely down his face while Ethan pulled him into a hard embrace beneath the dim amber lights. Years of guilt seemed to break apart quietly between them, while Rex stood and pressed close against both men with a low, relieved whine. Commander Mercer removed his glasses slowly and wiped his eyes without embarrassment. Mason Reed stared toward the fireplace, while Travis Boone quietly whispered a prayer under his breath. Claire watched the scene with tears shining softly in her tired blue eyes. Because after 8 years of death reports, silence, and grief, something holy had finally entered the room instead. Forgiveness. Ethan slowly stepped back from Ryan and smiled faintly for the first time all night. Besides, he murmured quietly, "You still owe me a birthday breakfast for my daughter." Ryan laughed once through tears. Broken, but genuine. Lily stirred softly beside Rex at the sound while the old German shepherd rested his head back onto her lap with tired, peaceful eyes. Outside, the mist drifted gently across Arlington Cemetery beneath the dark Virginia sky, while somewhere far beyond the memorial grounds, church bells began ringing midnight across the sleeping city. The church bells faded slowly into the Virginia night, leaving the visitors' center wrapped in a deep, peaceful quiet that felt almost sacred. The fireplace crackled softly beneath framed photographs and folded flags while outside, Arlington Cemetery shimmered beneath silver mist and rows of white marble glowing under moonlit clouds. For the first time in 8 years, Ethan Vale sat beside his family instead of surviving only inside their memories. Lily remained curled against Rex near the fire, half asleep now with her small hand resting gently over the old German shepherd's paw. Every few minutes her fingers tightened unconsciously against his fur, as though even in dreams she feared waking up alone again. Rex never moved away from her once. Ethan watched them quietly from the couch beside Claire, exhaustion softening the hard lines of his face now that the running had finally stopped. He still looked older than his years. The scars, the silver threading through dark hair near his temples, the cautious way his eyes tracked exits and windows out of habit. But beneath all of that, Claire could finally see pieces of the man she married still alive inside him. Ethan noticed her watching and smiled faintly. "What?" Claire shook her head slowly while tears threatened again. "I forgot your eyes changed color when you were tired." Ethan laughed softly under his breath at that. "That is a strange thing to remember. Not when you spent years loving someone." The words settled warmly between them. Across the room, Ryan Holt sat quietly near the coffee table, studying the faded mission file one final time before carefully closing it. Commander Mercer stood beside the windows with Daniel Pierce, Mason Reed, and Travis Boone, while low conversation drifted between them about reports, declassification procedures, and how to explain the impossible resurrection of a man the Navy officially buried nearly a decade earlier. But even those conversations sounded softer now, less like damage control, more like prayer answered unexpectedly. Ethan slowly leaned back against the couch cushions, fatigue finally overtaking the adrenaline that carried him through the reunion. Claire noticed immediately. "When was the last time you actually slept?" Ethan stared into the fireplace for several seconds before answering honestly. "I do not really remember." Claire's chest tightened painfully. Years spent moving through safe houses and borrowed apartments overseas had left permanent shadows inside him. She could see it now in the way his shoulders remained tense even while sitting beside his own family. Lily stirred softly near the fire and blinked sleepy blue, eyes open again. The moment she saw Ethan still there, relief crossed her face instantly. "You stayed." Ethan's expression softened so deeply it nearly broke Claire all over again. "Always." Lily pushed herself upright and padded sleepily across the rug toward him in oversized socks, while Rex followed close behind like a silent guardian. Ethan opened one arm instinctively, and she climbed onto his lap without hesitation, resting her head beneath his chin like she had done years ago as a toddler. Ethan closed his eyes holding her there. For several long seconds, he simply breathed. Claire watched his hand tremble slightly against Lily's back. Not from weakness, from gratitude too large for words. Rex settled heavily beside Ethan's boots with a tired sigh while the old dog's amber eyes slowly drifted shut for the first time all night. Commander Mercer noticed immediately. "That dog has not relaxed once since this started." Ethan gently scratched behind Rex's ears. "He carried all of us home." Silence followed because every person in the room knew it was true. Ryan finally stood and crossed slowly toward Ethan. The tension between them had changed now. No longer guilt alone. Something quieter. Like brothers returning from opposite sides of the same storm. Ryan reached into his coat pocket carefully before speaking. I kept something that belonged to you. Ethan frowned slightly as Ryan placed a pair of worn silver dog tags onto the coffee table between them. The chain was scratched and darkened with age, but unmistakable. Ethan stared at them in complete silence. I carried them every day, Ryan said quietly. I did not think I deserved to stop. Ethan slowly picked up the tags with rough, scarred fingers while emotion tightened visibly through his face. Again, one tag still bore faint burn marks near the edges. He remembered those tags. Remembered touching them during long, lonely nights overseas just to remind himself he once belonged somewhere. Lily leaned closer curiously. Can I see? Ethan smiled softly and placed the tags carefully into her small hands. She studied them like treasure. They are heavy. Ethan nodded faintly. Some things are supposed to be. Claire quietly wiped fresh tears from her eyes while Ryan looked toward Ethan again. I spent 8 years asking God for one chance to tell you I was sorry. Ethan looked at him steadily beneath the firelight. And now? Ryan glanced toward Lily beside him and Rex sleeping peacefully at Ethan's feet. Now I think maybe he answered through a dog instead. Ethan laughed softly through tired eyes. Sounds about right. Even Commander Mercer smiled faintly at that. Outside, the mist had finally begun clearing above Arlington Cemetery, revealing scattered stars across the dark Virginia sky. Midnight had long passed now. The visitors' center sat nearly empty except for the small circle of people gathered quietly around the fire like survivors after a storm. Claire gently rested her head against Ethan's shoulder while Lily traced the letters on his dog tags with tiny, careful fingers. Nobody rushed to speak anymore. Nobody needed to. Some moments become too holy for conversation. Rex slowly lifted his head then and looked toward Ethan one last time before settling back down onto the rug with a long, peaceful breath. Ethan noticed immediately. Hey, buddy, he whispered softly. The old German shepherd's tail brushed once against the floor without opening his eyes. Ethan's expression turned emotional again. You can rest now. The fire crackled low beside them while Arlington Cemetery glowed quietly beyond the windows like heaven standing watch over broken souls finally finding their way home. And somewhere deep in the stillness of that long Virginia night, guilt loosened its grip just enough for grace to enter instead. By the time dawn began touching the edges of Arlington Cemetery, the storm had completely passed. Pale golden light slowly spilled across rows of white marble headstones while morning fog drifted low between them like quiet prayer rising from the earth itself. Inside the visitors' center, the fire had burned down to soft, glowing embers, casting gentle warmth across the sleeping room. Lily remained curled against Ethan beneath a wool blanket someone had found in the back office during the night. Her small hand still clutched his dog tags, even in sleep. The silver chain wrapped loosely around her fingers as though she finally trusted they belonged home again. Claire rested beside them on the couch, one arm draped lightly across Ethan's shoulder while exhaustion and peace softened her face together for the first time in years. Rex lay stretched out across the rug near the fireplace, breathing slow and steady beneath the amber morning light. The old German shepherd looked older now that the tension had finally left his body. Gray fur framed his muzzle heavily, and faint scars crossed his broad shoulders like worn maps of old battles. But there was peace in him now, too. Deep peace. The kind, loyal souls earn only after completing the promise they carried for years. Ethan opened his eyes slowly as dawn brightened the windows overlooking Arlington. For a few disoriented seconds, he simply stared upward at the ceiling, caught between old instincts and unfamiliar safety. Then he felt Lily asleep against his chest and Claire beside him. He heard Rex breathing softly near the fire, and the truth settled quietly over him like sunrise itself. He was home. Ethan carefully shifted without waking Lily and looked toward the windows where morning light now painted silver across the cemetery grounds. Ryan Holt still sat awake near the far coffee table wrapped in silence and an untouched cup of cold coffee. He had not slept at all. The moment Ethan moved, Ryan glanced toward him and managed a tired, faint smile. Morning. Ethan nodded softly. You stayed. Ryan looked toward Rex, sleeping peacefully beside the fire. Did not feel right leaving before him. Ethan followed his gaze toward the old German shepherd, and something emotional crossed his face again. He used to hate thunderstorms, Ethan murmured quietly. Would crawl halfway into the bathtub during bad ones. Ryan laughed softly under his breath. Still better than Boone. That man screamed during turbulence over Kuwait. Travis Boone's tired voice immediately called from the hallway outside. I heard that. A ripple of quiet laughter moved gently through the room. Small. Human. Healing. Commander Mercer entered a moment later carrying fresh coffee, while Mason Reed and Daniel Pierce followed behind him beneath the soft morning glow. Nobody spoke loudly anymore. It felt wrong somehow, like they were standing inside something sacred and fragile. Claire slowly woke beside Ethan as the smell of coffee drifted through the room. For a second, panic flashed through her eyes before she saw him still there. Ethan noticed immediately and gently brushed one thumb along her hand. I am not disappearing again. Claire closed her eyes briefly, emotion tightening through her face before she nodded silently. Lily stirred next. Sleepy blue eyes blinked open slowly beneath tangled blonde hair. The moment she saw Ethan beside her, a smile spread instantly across her face, so bright it physically changed the room around her. Good morning, Daddy. Ethan nearly broke all over again hearing those words in morning light instead of memory. Good morning, sweetheart. Rex lifted his head at the sound of Lily's voice and slowly pushed himself upright with an old dog's stiffness before crossing quietly toward Ethan. The German shepherd rested his heavy head gently across Ethan's knee while Ethan buried both hands into the sable fur around his neck. There he is, Ethan whispered softly. Best soldier I ever knew. Commander Mercer stood quietly near the windows watching the scene unfold beside Arlington Cemetery. The Navy is going to have questions, he said eventually. Ethan nodded without looking up. I know. There will be investigations. Debriefings. Press. Ethan remained calm. Let them come. Claire looked toward him carefully. Are you ready for that? Ethan glanced toward Lily and Rex before answering. No. Then a faint smile touched his tired face. But I am finally ready to stop hiding. Morning sunlight slowly spread wider across the room, while Arlington Cemetery glowed peacefully beyond the glass. The nightmare that defined 8 lost years had not disappeared overnight. There would still be scars, difficult conversations, anger, recovery. Some wounds never fully leave people who survive war. But something greater than pain had entered the room now too. Return. Ryan quietly approached Ethan one last time before leaving. He hesitated briefly before holding out his hand. Ethan looked at it for a second, then stood and pulled Ryan into another hard embrace instead. Come by the house sometime, Ethan said softly. Ryan's eyes filled immediately. You sure? Ethan smiled faintly. Lily still needs those birthday pancakes. Lily grinned instantly from the couch. And whipped cream faces. Ryan laughed through tears. Yes, ma'am. One by one the others quietly said goodbye before stepping out into the soft Virginia morning beneath rows of white headstones and drifting mist. Commander Mercer paused near the doorway longest, his weathered eyes resting on Ethan and Rex together beside the fireplace. I spent 8 years believing God abandoned that mission, he admitted quietly. Ethan gently rested one hand against Rex's neck while morning light touched the old dog's amber eyes. Maybe he just trusted a dog to finish it. Mercer smiled softly at that before disappearing into the dawn. Silence returned gently to the visitor's center afterward. Not empty silence this time. Peaceful silence. Ethan sat back down beside Claire while Lily leaned happily against his shoulder beneath the blanket. Rex curled heavily at their feet with one long, exhausted sigh, finally resting like a guardian whose watch had ended. Outside, the first rays of sunrise spread fully across Arlington Cemetery, warming marble stone and wet grass beneath a clear Virginia sky. And somewhere in the stillness of that beautiful, quiet morning, a lost Marine, a grieving family, and one faithful German shepherd finally found what war could not take from them after all: each other.